So there's a reason we're calling this teaching series that we're in at the moment, I'm a Disciple, and not I'm a churchgoer or I'm a Christian. We should be able to call it I'm a Christian because Christian actually means little Christ. But nowadays Christian just means like a box for some people that they tick on a form. I'm white Christian, or people say I'm a Christian, I've been christened. What we mean is when we say I'm a disciple, it's not something that you can passively do. You can passively do a lot of things. My children prove this to me day in, day out. They're supposed to be students, they go to school, but yet when they come home from school, as a school goer, I say to them, what did you learn today? Nada, nothing, shrug, dunno, not sure. See, you can attend the institution, they sit in the chair, I'm sure because the teacher doesn't ring and say they weren't there, and they listen to the teacher saying something, they probably copy it down in their book, they make notes, but they have no clue at the end of the day what they learnt about. And so you can hear the teacher say some stuff, you can write it down, but if you don't remember it, if you don't understand it, if you can't apply what has been said, then you are not a student, you are just a child who is attending school. And we can do the very same thing at church. We can be passive churchgoers. Sure, you can get in your car, you can hop on the bus, you can walk, you can come to church on a Sunday, you can listen to what's being said, you can sing along with the songs. But unless you put your faith into action, out of this chair on a Sunday and into action in your everyday life, you are not being a disciple of Jesus. You are someone who is observing other people be a disciple of Jesus, maybe. But if you don't go anywhere, if you're not changing, if you're not growing to become more like Jesus, you're not a disciple. You're being a passive observer of other people being discipled. You might be static, you might be stuck, you might not have changed or grown in any way for a long time. But if you are a disciple, you are someone who is changing to be made more like Jesus. You can't be a disciple who's just passive, sitting in a chair. A disciple is someone who is following after Jesus. You're growing, you're moving in a direction that says, my old life is gone, and I'm moving into a new life, being transformed, being conformed into the likeness of Jesus. So to be a disciple means to become like the one you are following. It means more than just knowing what your teacher knows. It means more than just being able to recite the knowledge that your teacher has. It's not knowing how many books are in the Bible or knowing the original language of the scriptures or how many church services you attend. Being a disciple is becoming more like Jesus. We started a course together online this week, the Bible course from the Bible Society. It's really good. It's not too late to jump in. You can catch up on last week and join us this week on Wednesday night. It's a course learning about the Bible, who wrote the Bible, the different books, how are they made up, what do they mean for us today. And then we have a chat on Zoom in groups. So if you want to know more about that and you want to join in, let me know. It's amazing. But I went to university to study the Bible, and there were lots of professors there who taught me, and they knew a lot about the Bible, more than I could ever hope to know. But many of them were not disciples of Jesus. There were people who had dedicated their lives to studying the Bible as an ancient text or as a history book, professor in the Dead Sea Scrolls or this, that, and the other, but they didn't know Jesus. They weren't looking at the Bible with eyes of faith. They didn't know Jesus' voice or his ways. They were not being transformed by his Spirit. And some of them have given years of their life to becoming so knowledgeable about this book, the Bible, as this historical document, as this significant and influential thing, but they have not started on the journey of studying the Bible in faith, believing it is the power of God to divide soul and spirit, joints and marrow, that it judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. So they were just amazing teachers in a way who could tell me things about the Bible. They knew a lot about Jesus. They knew a lot about the Jewish culture and a lot about the Greco-Roman Empire and the ancient Near East, but they were not disciples of Jesus. And you know what? We see this whole paradox being played out on the world stage, even this week in politics with the inauguration of President Trump. And that's not a political comment. It's simply here to say you might have seen two sides of the line this week, and you've got people saying, I'm a Christian, and you've got people over here saying, I'm a Christian, yet what they are saying and doing look very different. And I just want to tell you this. If you're really a Christian, that means you're a disciple of Jesus Christ. A disciple of Jesus Christ is someone who is becoming more like Jesus. So if you watch the news and you're not sure who is what they say they are, the answer is what Jesus said. The most important is someone who follows after me will love God with all their heart and love their neighbor as themselves. So someone who claims to know Christ but cannot put into action the words of Christ is not a disciple of Christ. We might know loads about Jesus. Some of you here know a lot more than me. You might know loads about the Bible, and that's amazing. But if we don't let that into our hearts and into our souls to change us, to make us more like Jesus, we are not disciples. And as we continue this series, I want to encourage you, if you don't know what Jesus was like, dive into the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Read them. See how Jesus spoke. See how he interacted. See how he lived. Because we are meant to be becoming more like him. How did Jesus treat people? How did he live his life? Ephesians 5:1 says, be imitators of God. Therefore, as dearly loved children, live a life of love as God loved us and gave himself for us. If we're to be imitators of God, we have to know what Jesus is like, and we have to imitate. We have to live in the way Jesus lives. So there's plenty of people who can wax eloquent about Jesus, who know all the Bible verses, who show up to a church on Sundays, who give their tithe and do their duty, but they are not disciples of Jesus Christ. A disciple of Jesus Christ is someone who is becoming like Jesus. And Onki spoke to us last week about following, that to be a disciple means to follow Jesus. And today they've given me this is why I need tips at the end. They've given me the topic of denying yourself. So to be a disciple of Jesus, we have to follow him. Second of all, we have to deny ourselves, just like we've read in Ephesians. God gave himself for us as a sacrifice of love. And as his disciples, we are to imitate him. Therefore, it can shock the modern day disciple just as much as it shocked the first 12 disciples of Jesus when we read these words of Jesus in Luke chapter 9 that we're going to look at today. Luke chapter 9, starting at verse 22. Jesus said, Peter's just realized that Jesus is the Messiah, and Jesus says, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And he said to them all, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his soul? So in this passage, we've got Peter, and he's literally just realized Jesus is not just a good teacher. He's not just an amazing rabbi. He's the Messiah, the one we've been waiting for. And he makes this confession, you are the Christ, you are the Messiah. And Jesus, these guys are thinking, this is what we've been waiting for. Someone is going to help us claim back our country. We're going to restore Israel to the great nation that it should be. We're going to be set free from under the control of the Romans. We're going to be part of this political overthrow. We're going to be in positions of power after this. Can't believe we're following the Messiah. This is amazing. And Jesus says, the Son of Man must suffer, be rejected, and die. So I think it's starting to dawn on the disciples, this kind of realization that what they signed up for might not be quite what they imagined. My daughter, for her birthday this year, decided she wanted to get her ears pierced. Now, this is something she's asked for a long time, but we keep putting it off year after year, when you're this old. And so on the 5th of January, it was her birthday, and we gave her a little card saying, you can get your ears pierced. And then every day since then, and she's been saying, what day am I going to get my ears pierced? And I'm going, just wait a little bit longer, Yesterday was the day that we went to the piercing place. And as we walked in the door, and the nice cheery lady there was like, hello, you've come for your ears pierced and everything, I just started to see a realization dawning on my child's face that actually getting your ears pierced might not be quite like when you go to Claire's Accessories and you look at all the amazing earrings that you could only have if your mum would let you get your ears pierced instead of all the clip-on ones that are not as good. And she realized as she went into that little room, there's a man and a woman here with these gun things, and they're actually going to make a hole in my ear. And I could see this sort of realization dawning across her face. And then we went into this little room, and she sat on like a hospital bed kind of thing. And they were like, would you like to hold your mummy's hands? And she was like, mm-hmm. And like, they were like, you're going to hear a noise a bit like, poof. And she was like, oh, okay. And I was like, just let me check in. Are you sure you want to do this, babe? Yeah, definitely. She was like, yeah. And you'll be pleased to know, well, I don't know if you'll be pleased or you won't care, but you can check her ears later. Very nice earrings are in the ears. No one fainted, no tears were shed, and we made it out alive. But sometimes you might decide to do something, and you might be in this position where you've been in a moment, there's been some nice music, you're like, yes, Lord, I want to follow you, Jesus. But I'm explaining to you today the reality of what that decision means. And sometimes it doesn't mean a nice atmosphere in a comfy, cozy church with the heating on where we're all having a lovely time. Sometimes it means Jesus said, deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me. See, the disciples thought they signed up to follow this rabbi. Then they realized the rabbi, whoa, hang on a minute, this is the Messiah that we've been reading about and learning about all our lives, the one we've been waiting for. We're going to right the wrongs of this world. We're going to overthrow the Romans. We're going to get our nation back on top. But instead, Jesus starts to explain to them, and they have this dawning realization, maybe things are not going to work out quite how we imagined. And what they will later come to know and experience is that if Jesus is going to suffer, be rejected, and be killed, if that is the case for Jesus, it will also become the case for them as his followers. Jesus was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, familiar with suffering. And if you follow the story of the disciples, you'll see Peter, he denies Christ. But as their journey goes on, and as you look into the history of what happened to them, many were killed for their faith. They suffered, they were persecuted. We are to be imitators of Christ. So Jesus said, if anyone would come after me, that means come behind me, follow behind me, like Onki said, be my disciple, let him deny. That word is like deny, disown. It means a public kind of disavowing of something, changing your allegiance publicly from one thing to another. So if anyone would come after me, let him get behind me and deny his old life, his old way of being, align himself with me. In this case, you're denying yourself, your rights, your agenda, your stuff. If anyone wants to walk behind me, come after me, be my disciple, then let him deny or disown himself. Bear his own cross. That means lift it up, take it up every day. Bear that cross every 24-hour day period. In every moment, decide, I'm going to follow after Jesus. I'm going to take up my cross. To take up the cross, we have to let go of our own stuff. And this language is not appealing to us. These concepts of discipleship are not really the dream that we're all looking for, to suffer and be rejected and to be killed and to daily crucify our own desires and take up our cross and follow after Jesus. And I want to quickly look at what 3 things that the cross represents today. As we say, yeah, if we're going to say, yeah, I'm willing to deny myself, to let go of my stuff and to take up the cross. What does the cross really represent? 3 things I want to quickly point out that the cross represents to us today. Number 1 is submission. The cross represents submission, not to our own ways and will, but to God's way. See, Jesus had to do this. We read, before Jesus was crucified, he went to pray, to talk to the Father. He's in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he prays, yet not my will be done, but yours. Even though he didn't want it, even though he sweat drops of blood, and he cried out to God, let there be another way. But if there isn't, then let it be your will and not mine. So ultimately, Jesus laid down his rights, his will, his way, his want of how things should work out. And taking up our cross daily means submitting daily to the will of the Father. Whether it's the way we would prefer to do things, whether it's what we would like to spend our money on, whether it's the place we want to go to, whether it's a comfort zone we don't want to step out of, whether it's a relationship that we think is good but we know it's bad but we prefer it, whether it's having to enter into a relationship that we just don't really like that person and prefer not to. Yet God is asking us to submit to his will and to his way. And it's not very often easy, because we love to be in control of our own stuff and we love to think that we know best. It can be easy to submit when it's the same thing that we want, when it's what our heart desires. And the more we know Jesus, the more our desires become aligned with his, so the easier it is to follow along with his will. But it's not really submission until the rubber hits the road and it's something that you don't really want to do. It's easy to submit to your boss at work when they're going about things the way you would go about them. As soon as it becomes a different idea, it becomes harder to submit. But ultimately, submission is about trust. It's about having the trust in God, the confidence in God to say that he knows best, to know that he is loved, to know that he is good all the time. So following Jesus asks us to deny ourselves by submitting to God. That's what the cross represents, submission. The second thing it can represent is suffering. Jesus suffered on the cross. He suffered as he obeyed the will of the Father. And this one is probably even worse and harder to hear than submission, because nobody likes the thought of suffering. Nobody wants to sign up to suffer. Nobody wants to sign up to endure hardship and challenge and pain. But Jesus suffered as he hung on the cross and bore the weight of our sin, and he cried out to God, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He knew what it was to suffer both physically and in his soul. And when we say, "I want to follow Jesus," we have to acknowledge that that is a road marked with suffering, that the way is narrow, that sometimes things in this earth are just rubbish and hard. And the glory of the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, is not that we are removed from our suffering, but that we have a God who left the glory of heaven and became like us and suffered alongside us, who knows what it is to endure pain and hardship and is with you in the midst of your suffering. I wish sometimes in my own human thinking that the glory of the gospel was that give your life to Jesus and all your pain and suffering will be removed from you. But it isn't. The good news of the gospel, what makes our faith so different to any other, is that God left the glory of heaven and became like you and me. He knows what it is to face loss. He knows what it is to suffer. And he's with you, right there with you, as you go through the hardships of life. And yet he asks us, take up your cross and follow me. And so the cross represents submission. It represents suffering. And finally, the cross represents selflessness. Philippians says, "For the joy set before him, Jesus endured the cross, putting us before himself. He came not to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many." The way of Jesus is selfless. It is to deny ourselves, to lay down our ideas of what I deserve, what my rights are, what we are owed. Jesus made himself nothing, taking on the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. So how can we be imitators of Christ? How can we be his disciples? By denying ourselves, through choosing every day to take up our cross. That means choosing every day, I'm going to submit to God's ways that are higher than my ways. I'm going to acknowledge that this way of life includes suffering. But I've got that incredible truth of knowing there's a God who suffers alongside with me. It means knowing that the easy road very often isn't the right road. And choosing selflessness, which means every time saying each other's needs to prefer. How can I put other people before myself? That's what Jesus did for you and for me. So denying yourself is saying no to the desires of our selfish nature and yes to the desires of the Holy Spirit, yes to the will of God. It's not an easy way out at all, but Jesus says, whoever wants to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake, this is the one who will save it. What good does it do a person if he gains the whole world but loses himself? What's the point? You can have everything this world has to offer, and you'll still leave here with nothing. We're not created for this world. We're not created just to amass stuff for ourselves. We're created for eternity, disciples of a different kingdom. We owe our allegiance to another, one who calls us to a cruciform life, to love poured out for those around us at our expense, to prefer the needs of others. And that is a costly discipleship. It's more than membership to a club. It's more than a nice time on a Sunday. It's more than going through the motions of Christianity. It's an all-consuming life. That every day, day in, day out, moment by moment, we have to bring ourselves and our spirit and our selfish nature into check. Choose to lay down our rights. Take up our cross and follow Christ. I'm just going to ask Rach to come up and play for us as we bring it to a close. The calling on our lives, on each one of us, is a high calling. One we are not worthy of, yet he calls us and invites us to follow him. And honestly, it's not often easy, yet what choice do we have? If you truly know Jesus, if you truly encounter his presence, his love, his goodness, we're ruined for the things of this world. The things of this world have nothing on Jesus. And you know what? When you live this life and you start walking it out, the world around you will not get it. They will not get you. They might even despise you. But bravely follow Jesus anyway. C.S. Lewis, famous for The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, but also has lots of other good writing. He writes this: the terrible thing, the almost impossible thing, is to hand over your whole self, all your wishes and precautions to Christ. But it is far easier than what we are all trying to do instead. For what we are all trying to do is remain what we call ourselves, to keep personal happiness as our great aim in life, and yet at the same time be good. We are all trying to let our mind and our heart go their own way, centered on money or pleasure or ambition, and hoping in spite of this to be able to behave honestly and chastely and humbly. And this is exactly what Christ warned us you could not do. As he said, a thistle cannot produce figs. If I am a field that contains nothing but grass seed, I cannot produce wheat. Cutting the grass may keep it short, but I will still produce grass and no wheat. If I want to produce wheat, the change must go deeper than the surface. I must be ploughed up and re-sown. That is why the real problem of the Christian life comes where people do not usually look for it, for it comes the very moment you wake up each morning. All your wishes and hopes for the day rush at you like wild animals, and the first job each morning consists simply in shoving them back, in listening to that other voice, taking that other point of view, letting the other, larger, stronger, quieter life come flowing in. And so on, all day, standing back from your natural fussings and frettings, coming in and out of the wind. You know, denying yourself is not really a winning topic. It sounds like it's all about loss. But what good does it do a person if he gains the whole world and loses himself? We realize that a loss in this life pales in comparison to the glory of the life to come. We cannot be double-minded. We cannot serve two masters. We can't chase after happiness in this life and pursue Jesus wholeheartedly. And C.S. Lewis goes on to say it's hard, but the sort of compromise we are all hankering after is harder. In fact, it is impossible. It may be hard for an egg to turn into a bird, but it would be a jolly sight harder for it to learn to fly whilst remaining an egg. We are all like eggs at present, and you cannot go on indefinitely just being an ordinary decent egg. The egg must either hatch and learn to fly or go bad. I believe God is inviting us to give him our yes again, or maybe for the very first time. The world invites us to compromise. It tells us it's enough to just be a good person. It's enough to just do the right things some of the time. It's enough if you're trying your best. The gospel of Jesus Christ says you have to die to yourself. You have to be ploughed up and re-sown. Unless the seed falls to the ground and dies, it cannot produce fruit. Maybe you've made a decision before to follow Jesus and it's not been explained quite in the nice terms that I've explained it to you today. Maybe you've never made that decision. I'm not here to market something to you, to sell you this, you're going to be walking on a fluffy cloud for the rest of your life and everything's going to feel amazing. I'm here to tell you the reality of following Jesus means submission, suffering, selflessness. But I'm also here to tell you that the treasures of this world pale in significance compared to the glory of the life that God has for you. An incredible journey of following after Jesus, of being able to say, I'm a disciple. And maybe you want to respond in your own heart to that today. The invitation is there for each one of us. Jesus asks, would you deny yourself, take up your cross and follow after me daily? For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his soul? And if that is you, if you would like to say yes to following after Jesus, or you want to make that kind of recommitment in your heart to be a disciple, maybe you feel you've just been on the outside watching other people journey with Jesus, and you want to take a next step for you. We're going to sing in a moment. I want you in your heart just to, it's between you and God to say, what is my next step? And if you've never done that and it's the first time you've ever taken up Jesus' invitation to follow him, I would like to encourage you to do that today. It might not always be easy, but it's worth it.